Welcome to the Convergent Science and Instrument Forum podcast on collaboration. I'm Paul Verschoor, and together with my colleague Julia Loop, we speak with Professor Jonatas Manzolli, composer, mathematician, and research leader of the interdisciplinary nucleus of sound communication at the University of Campinas in Brazil. His research is focused on applications of mathematical models of complex systems to music composition and interactive systems. As a composer, he has created and performed dozens of orchestra pieces and operas. Jonatas reflects on collaboration in the performing arts.
Jonatas, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, really, it's amazing to be with you, Paul. And for a long time, we don't see each other in presence. And also, Julia, it's an immense pleasure. And thank you for inviting me to this talk.
Great. Well, so Jonatas, so before we start to discuss collaboration, could you give a short description of your career path so far that brought you to this point of the discussion with us on collaboration?
Okay, I think if I'm going to say something about that, I think the story starts when I decided to follow classes in the university. I was doing maths, and also I decided to go to follow musical classes. I have done musical class before and so on. And suddenly the things crash in my mind or in my view of world, because in one side I have people trying to say to me that I have to understand things, and the other side I have people try to make me think about emotion, about interpretation, and about how interpretation can be a word model. And the other side, the mathematicians try to understand. You have to understand. And I think from that, I think I became a little bit a slave of this. I don't know if my life is for interpretation or if my life is for understand. And I don't know. I think for humankind is that the biggest problem. If you understand things or if you do interpretations of things. And after that, when I was doing maths and music, I decided to go to a master degree in math. So I decided to understand, in that case, understand how the musical instrument works in an orchestra. It was an immense work. And when I came out of that, I didn't make any kind of musical composition. I was a little bit frustrated because I understood the orchestra and I make a very sophisticated mathematical model, but I didn't play with it. What means I understand it, but I don't produce art. I didn't produce art with that. So that I decided to move to my PhD in composition. So and the emphasis would be in creation. But also I start to go and understand this. And always in the PhD, I have this discussion about, are you producing music with maths or are you producing arts or something like that? I think this is my entire life. So after that, I understood, and I'm not going to go in details, that what I'm doing now and what's my proposal in life is to be a kind of interface, a kind of bridge between possibilities of understand and interpretation. For me, arts is not for understand anything. Arts in music is for interpretation, is to produce things that make us to not to understand the world, but to live. And for the other side, science is somehow made for understand. But I think both profit from each other, because if you make a question about how the universe started, you understand that you wouldn't, what it means, because life is not only depends on how the universe starts, it depends on many, many other things. So, and in that sense, after that, I start to teach at the University of Campinas. And from there, I drive my students in this kind of questions. And for many years, I was the head of the nucleus, interdisciplinary nucleus for sound studies. And I have their students from music, from dance, from engineering. And one day in my life, I met Paul in Unicamp. we had this conversation how our robots can drive a program or a system that was developing with a system that's based on maths. So the idea is how this robot talks to the system. And from that, we developed many, let's say, many conversations. And coming to today, inside this COVID pandemics, I start to think that's the best for this kind of research is to not only to produce artifacts that interact with people, but is produce artifacts that make good for people. It's different, you know. Paul, I didn't get. I don't listen to your.
Yeah. I'm sorry. So, but you started in the musical domain as an accomplished pianist, right? And then you also became a conductor. You moved to interactive music systems. You are also a composer. So there's a very broad set of experiences you have there, right? And in parallel, you are also a mathematician, and you're teaching a number of courses in that domain, right? So you have always been balancing these two experiences. Now, in that context, so given that, how would you define collaboration? What is collaboration, and what is it good for?
I think I have two words to define collaboration: dialogue and good heart. Okay, okay, it's three. Okay, but good heart is try to understand the other. I think it's about to listen to people. Collaboration is more than trying to make people do things. Collaboration is about to make people talk, and also it's more about to listen to people than let's say try to make them develop something.
Yeah, but that's very abstract.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that first? I want to go back just a step before I get to this point right here, and that is you describe composing or compositions as being the interpretation of something. So if we take an example like the Rite of Spring, Stravinsky would have taken the creation or the evolution and interpreted it in this musical composition. Am I understanding you correctly?
Exactly.
Okay.
And of course, please,
okay.
Julie, go.
So as a composer, you try to create a dialogue with the listener in as much as you're trying to project a concept, you're trying to interpret a concept and give it to the listener for that listener to take it up and understand as he or she would understand the concept. Is that your goal as a composer?
I think my goal as a composer is to give them the opportunity to make their own interpretation. I don't think my personal interpretation is the main task of it's my opinion, the main task of a composer. Composer is, let's say, if he's responsible, he is a person that opens a door for other people's interpretation. Of course, if Stravinsky, let's take another mode of creation, or let's take another thing in his worldview, his music is going to be a little bit different. Of course, it will be. But on the other hand, the way people take Stravinsky music and share, let's say, emotionally, and also combine the ideas of Stravinsky with their own ideas, I think it's a matter of art. I think, at least for me, it's the matter of composition.
Yeah, so I want to understand something here, right? I want to understand something. I'm not creating.
Yes, of course.
And so what I try to now we're on the track of the composer. Okay, so the composer. Yes. Now the composer tries to also orchestrate or define a form of collaboration. So what is it? What are you exactly defining among all these agents that you're trying to now proactively control? How do you structure that? What's happening?
I think it's a very complex kind of collaboration. Let's take a piece of music. Let's take Stravinsky again. Imagine you have to collaborate with the orchestra You have to collaborate with the conductor. Okay, this is in a technical level. And there are composers that maybe they say, okay, it's enough. Let's say if the orchestra and the conductor understand my score, my function is done. It's not what I think. I think it's partially done, because there's another collaboration that is the collaboration of the meaning that I'm sharing with people. And this is a spontaneous thing that comes from me, comes from my music, comes from my score, and goes to people.
Okay, but let's first look at the technical part, okay?
Okay.
The technical part, because now you use a notation system. You use a notation system to, if you want, program future actions of a bunch of agents in the orchestra and the conductor. So how do you structure that? What are the key ingredients of that algorithm, if you want, to make that composition work?
You know that I work with algorithmic composition.
That's why I thought it would.
But I'm not going to answer you in this way.
Look, I'm trying.
Of course. What I want to tell you, it's somehow there are rules, of course. Mm-hmm. There are ways of organization. And also we know that for many times we say music is organized sounds, But the point is, the organization can be done in many levels. Of course, one level is the level of the way you write music. Okay, you have a symbolic notation that many people understand, and around this symbolic notation, people can produce and make it one of interpretation of music. This is one level. The second level is the way the sound is linked to the symbolic score. So that means I go in the way of work, but because this sound is not always what is written in the score. People say, why not? Of course it's not. Because the instruments, they have different shapes. It's very complex. And the people playing one instrument is different from the other. So I have this second level, the level of the sound. And I have the third level, that I would say the emotional level, the level of the relationship between these two with the audience and with myself and with that's the social relationship. So my research for many years, and now I think, consists on trying to understand the symbolic notation. And for that, I work with parameters. So I represent this symbolic notation in mathematical parameters, and I work with computers to produce some score. This is one level. And I had this experience in Ada. When you put there, the machine is producing sounds and people start to react, we have these two second levels, because the sound itself, it's not what you write, but it's what people listen to. Mm-hmm. So you have to do research in perception.
I understand, but before we go there, Jonatas, in structuring your score, right? So, for instance, recently, I think you wrote an opera, right? Recently, you wrote an opera. So, in structuring your score, you want to make sure that all the future orchestra members and the choir and so on collaborate together to realize what you intend they realize. So, do you?
That's one level.
No, that's one level, but still, just at that level, do you structure this around a goal? For instance, do you give them a goal? Do you declare a goal? Or is it more microscopic in the way
I think
with them?
Okay, I got to your question. I think I have for orchestration, I'm teaching orchestration for many years, and I always say to my students that orchestration is architecture. So is how you work in orchestration. You think about the building when people are going to live, or the building when people are going to listen to music. So you have many layers of the orchestra, the instruments, you have the layer of the notes. So, but how it comes to you? How do you start to work with that? I think the best thing I gave to my students is that you should have a holistic idea, a general idea of the concept. Because if you don't have this general idea, you go to the details and your composition does not survive.
I understand.
And how this general idea comes to you? Many ways. For me, for example, I'm very visual. So sometimes I have visual ideas. And for me, and I think we should do research on that, I think all people are synesthetic. What I mean by that, so when I listen to a sound, it comes to me with images. But I don't think it's only to me, it's for everybody. Because I think we have a big confusion when we talk about organization of sounds, that we talk only about the level of the writing.
But are you then saying, Jonathan, are you saying that then in developing a piece driven by an image you have, you try to get that image in the head of everyone who has to realize that piece?
Not that image, but that image might drive others people's image. The point is that I'm not the composer. You know that idea of the romantic composer. I don't like this idea that the romantic composer is a superhero that is a genius, and what is inside his brain or his mind goes to everybody, and he has to be immortal because this is going to be forever. I don't believe in that.
Is it correct to say, going back to your original discussion of dialogue, social relationship, that as a composer, you're trying to create a dialogue, and this is the collaboration. You're giving ideas to spark a dialogue, an exchange.
And also people after the concert, the musicians, when we do the rehearsal, and my students, everybody, they give feedback to me. I think, and it's not about to impose an idea, but it's about to drive a pendulum. The pendulum, the pendulum comes to me, go to you, and come back. You have this feedback, and for me, it's the better way of describing how it's with driving ideas is somehow like a self-organized system.
Yeah, but that's a tricky one, right? Because what does it exactly mean? And also, still, as a composer, you are writing your score. So, for instance, in the piece, in the orchestra, you might want to have the strings to sort of interact with the wind instruments in some way. So you want them to collaborate. So how do you implement that then as you're composing the piece?
I know. I write there the score and ask people to play what I wrote. But what I try to say, in the level of the symbolic score, it's not enough to do it.
But what I'm trying to force you to say, in some sense, is what's really that architecture? What's that building? What are the structural elements of that building?
How the ideas are driven in a piece of music. As I told you previously, we have the symbolic notation. This is one layer, okay? I work with my notation in that layer. This layer is for 400 years, let's say, in the hands of the composers. We learn how to use it. So in that layer, I customize my ideas in details. I give to the flute the notes the flute has to play. I give to the clarinet the notes. I give the articulation. I describe also the way they have to do in terms of dynamics. And also I give some guides when in the rehearsal time to the conductor. So this is one level. I call this level of symbolic communication. Let's describe symbolic to me is based on a notation. Okay, when the rehearsal starts, the orchestra starts, many other things comes out. One of the things is not only about the score, it's about the position where the musician is sitting, the relation with the sound. And so this realm of complex relationship also are there in the orchestra. So in that sense, I call the second layer the layer of the sound. Or say the layer when people, because the orchestra has to build a sound for my music or for any music of anybody. So it's one point that people don't know, and people that has this misunderstand the function of the conductor. My God, the conductor is there really to help the orchestra to build this sound. It's very special. And he's not on. Sorry?
Could I ask if I'm interpreting you correctly? In going back to Paul's question of wanting an architecture, you're saying that the score, your composition, is the framework for the collaboration among the people involved, among the orchestra, but also probably including the people who are listening to it. The score itself sets up an interaction first among the musicians, and then further out in how it's interpreted by the listeners.
I think I couldn't describe better the idea of framework. Thank you very much. And that, but the point is that since it's the framework, and many times when do collaboration, we understand the framework or is the rule where people has to behave very much, let's say, in a very strict way. And I think, of course, the musicians, they have their freedom to do interpretation, even in a big orchestra.
But Jonatas, I can now I might annoy you, because I could now say your description, in some sense, has still turned all the agents in the system downstream in automata. Because I have
not at all.
I have not understood. I have not understood.
I'm not said that.
How did you orchestrate their collaboration? What makes it collaborative, what they do?
That's the point. I think sometimes there are people that believe that the conductor is a kind of king or whatever, dictatorship, and people do everything he or she says. Okay, I think if it happens, the music is going. There's no expression. The point in the orchestra is that we're going to stay forever in the orchestra. But the orchestra, for me, is a good example of collaboration. It's because it's a kind of framework where you have to have a kind of tolerance. Let's talk between the collaborators, that the musicians, the conductor, and the collaboration with the composer that maybe is not there. But he produced the score. He gave guides for them, and they have. And in the ways you have to respect the score as much as you respect yourself. And it's a good example, because how people work together in an orchestra is each person has a unique way of performing an instrument, even if it is a kind of a let's say, very uniform orchestra where the sound sounds beautiful. This big orchestra in Europe, for example. So even that, you have the small collaboration of everybody. So my point is that if they all have to collaborate, if they are a kind of automata, there wouldn't be any kind of meaning, really, no meaning. Because let me finish. Yeah. The meaning comes from these small variations that each person in his own interpretation give for the sound and give for the framework that the composer proposed. And in that sense, is a very good example also of synergy.
Okay, but then what makes that collaborative, Jonatas? So if
what they make, okay, that's another point. Okay.
Well, that's the one I'm after.
No. Of course, I describe it how I believe the system behave. Okay, or the system works. What makes them collaborative? I think there are many ways. There are good ones and there are bad ones. Maybe the salary, or they are there. Of course, but they are also. But I think, in my view, when they are sitting and start to play, there's a goal of making this piece of music as the better as they can. They are there engaged for that. So that means, and if they don't do individual collaboration, that means play what they have to play, but they have to play with their own interpretation, the whole system is not going to give that interpretation. As you say, for example, if the spring, for example, Stravinsky has been played many times. If you listen to one interpretation, you have listened to another. So it's the same music. The framework is the same, but there are many variations. Where are these variations? Of course, in the way the conductor give cues for the musicians, but also in the collaboration of the orchestra. And I'm sitting there in the audience, and I have I listen again, Stravinsky again, I say, oh, this is a new interpretation. Mm-hmm. And this new interpretation gives a new meaning to me. So that means it's the end. I don't think it's the end, but it's the way that the music conveying meaning by sharing the dialogue with the composer, with the musician, and with the audience. I think music...
The dialogue and the social interaction among these players.
Social interaction, technical one, that there are only people that has the technology, and there are many others. I'm taking another example, a little bit out of the Western, let's say, the orchestra. Let's take, for example, the example of Steve Reich, when he was there in Africa, try to study how people do music. So he established some relations with the his approach for minimal music. So suddenly he realized that there are people playing music and they play together, and there's no conductor, there's no composer, but the music sounds very pleasant, very complex, and immense interesting. So what's the difference? Okay, for me, it's that the level of the interaction among the religion, the social relationship between them is very high, and they produce music because they listen to the other, and they have more freedom individually to add something. Of course, in the orchestra, let's go back to the orchestra. I think in the orchestra, the individuality has less importance, but it's still there. But there, in a ritual, when they do music, the individuality has more importance. But for me, both models are interesting. In one, you have the score that's a framework to give an opportunity to people to perform. In the other one, you have a kind of social relationship in kind of ritual that put everybody together and try to play music.
But so, Jonatas, can you explain then, in these two situations you now describe, what's the role of something like trust, or is there a role of something like trust in that?
Many. I think this is a good word. Because what I mean by trust, and I don't know what you mean by trust, but what I mean by trust is not to believe in you. I mean by trust is that I give to you the opportunity to give something to me that please me. This is trust to me. It's not give you, say, I believe in you and I do what you. I believe in God, so I'm going to do everything God's tell me. No, I'm not saying that. I say, if something comes to me that pleases me and I trust that comes from you, I think trust is this pleasure to not to serve, but this pleasure of stay together and amplify this. And trust has to be between the conductor and the musicians. And in another situation in Africa, the trust between them. Mm-hmm. They are, and it makes a community.
But so I don't know. How do you, if you want, orchestrate that as a conductor or as a composer or as an instrumentalist?
Well, but the point is that there are situations when they need the composer. There are the other situations they don't need. So that let's take again this Reich example. After being there in Africa, he came back to New York and we wrote, for example, clapping music. So he takes a little bit the structure, what he heard and he thought about the structure of the pulse, this pulse, and we wrote it, and he composed a piece of music. In that sense, the process that people are using there, this composer make an abstraction and brought it in another framework. There in Africa, the framework is not the score. The framework there is the social relationship and the word you said, the trust. And after there, when clapping music was performed many times, there's one layer that I call the symbolic notation, and the other layer is the way people play the score. And here, there's one point that's I think is important. The composer, sometimes he's a person that brings this abstraction, like for this example, to the framework, to the score. He brings it. But I don't think the score is enough. But
that's what I indeed wanted to understand, because I could imagine that as you put a score together, you put ingredients in there of, for instance, transiently entraining certain instruments. So in that sense, you could also try to build up a trust relation because there is some reciprocal interaction between them. So is it that the case? Would you use elements of that kind to construct trust in
Yes, I think so. That I think this let's say this way our talk go in a very good direction, the direction that I believe. Let's say clear about. For example, I work with the Unicamp Symphony Orchestra for many years. They have make many award premiere of works of mine. So let's talk about, for example, Descoberta. That was an opera, okay? And I go to this kind of, I go to the trust, but I need a minute. So to explain. So in that opera, the idea was to celebrate the 15th anniversary of Unicamp. And also, I had the idea to convey with my music that celebration. One point that I start to think, it's I describe the history of somebody that's found the Unicamp or another big scientist. I'm not going to describe Unicamp history, but I'm going to describe somebody history that's important to Unicamp. And after many times, I realized that the best to describe creation in Unicamp exactly is describe how people work when they are doing creation. So in that opera, Descoberta, there's no narrative, there's no character. There's only the process of creation, how I represent it, because it's a metaphor for our discussion. I decided that I have a score, of course, but I need to have the collaboration of other people. I have dancers, okay? I have a percussionist, a special group of percussion. I have the orchestra, and I have a team of technicians that they are going to build up the multimodal system that's going to amplify and describe the movement for the audience. So when I have this big project, I have to combine the different levels of understanding between these different disciplines. For example, for the dancers, the time for make the choreography is much longer than for the musicians. When for the production of the whole choreography, they took around 6 months, almost. And for the score, that for the orchestra, they did the rehearsal was around 15 days, half month. And for the percussionists, because there's a kind of special sounds, they expand a little around 2 months. So, and my question is, why for the same score, we have this difference between this time difference for the interpretation. Okay. For example, for the dancers, they have to learn with their bodies and make the expression in their bodies. There's no instrument, and my score does not work for them as it works for the musicians. Because for musicians, they have a prescription of notes. And the dancers, they don't have any prescriptions. Prescription. They have to build up the choreography step by step. And for the percussionists, they are combined these two levels because they have the level of the body. Because I think the percussion is one of the musical instruments that involves too much the body. And also, I put the instruments in the opera in many different places in the percussion instrument, in many different places of the stage.
Mm-hmm.
So, but when I was developing this whole project, I have to trust Cynthia, that was the conductor. I have to trust Danielle. I have to trust Fernando, and also the technicians. But we are involved, and I think the most important factor that's make this project being a success was, for me, from my point of view, to understand the different time that people have to work and to collaborate with between languages. For example, the musicians, their protocol, with their protocol, they act a little bit fast. Okay, but the dancers, they have to build up the protocol. And the percussionists, they are between them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the score of this opera, it's there with the notes, okay? But it's not the choreography. And of course, and you have to talk about.
Yeah, but my question was, Jonatas, whether you then include in the composition elements to instill trust and instill the collaboration. For instance, by building dialogues inside the piece.
That's a good question. I decided to put some spice. Let's call this spice. Mm-hmm. That's our moments of let's say, I wouldn't say cues, because cues is too little, but there are small space in the score that represents space for I would say kind of bifurcation. I give you an example. For example, when the orchestra is performing a piece of music, everybody's sitting there in the stage, okay, and the public is sitting here and listen to that. We call this Italian theater. For this opera, because I was interested in describing the creation process, I put some cues in this space. It's not only the position of the conductor, but the position of the dancers in this space that you give cues for interpretation. So this was prescribed on the score. Mm-hmm. There's a chance of that happen. But of course, the time when it happened and why it happens depends very much on the choreographer. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit different from the musical score, because the musical score, the time when something is going to happen is there. You have the bar number one number there, or 20, 21, doesn't matter. But even there, when you have the time to produce something, you have a small chance of modulating. Mm-hmm. For the dance. When you add the space in their body, the tolerance of the score has to be larger. Let's be great.
But Jonatas, you described.
I don't know if I'm answering your question. I think I make a lot of confusion. But let's try to combine this. It's because I'm working not only with musicians, I'm working with dancers, mm-hmm. and I'm working with engineering. I try to tell you that the trust not only depends on the score and the frameworks, depends also the level of response. Mm-hmm. Each element of the system has to the stimulus, mm-hmm. and depend the way their let's say, the work mind, and in the way they take the project. For example, an engineering in the opera takes the project in one way, the dancer in another way, and the musician in another way.
Mm-hmm.
So that means to make it possible to do this collaboration, we have to respect that level of acquisition of knowledge and also in producing results.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a group with many different kinds, not only people, but with different kinds of approach, you have to respect this as well.
I understand, I think. But now you gave this one example, right, for this complex piece you put together. But can you give an example of other experiments you've done, also composing a piece, conducting a piece, where it just didn't work, where it really failed, where this creative collaboration does really not come off the ground? What's failure in that case?
I love this too much. I don't know. I have to think about. Let me think about. Maybe I'll give an example. I remember. So I wrote a piece of music for percussion and string quartet. Okay, and my mistake was to think that the sound, the way I was going to prescribe the sound on the score, the string for the performer, it would sound like, for example, the sounds of the percussion. My mental goal was to make the string orchestra become a kind of percussion orchestra, and the percussion instrument becomes a string. Okay, I tried to invert the function, and what's happened? I was there with the conductor. I explained to them the idea, but they don't get it. They not get it. Maybe they don't like. And they said no. The string or not rough like you want. We play because I want them to make very close to rock. And I push them to say, how you have to take détaché, not you have to take very rough and change the way you do the interpretation of the string instrument. And I ask the percussionist, when you play I ask them to play a vibraphone, play this, and he's going to play the vibraphone with the bow as one string instrument. Play this is very soft. It sounds like a string. So the point is, I think I liked my project, but when I came in front of the orchestra and described to them my proposal, they said, no, it's impossible because you change too much the function of the instrumentation in the traditional way. You want to make us to do what we don't think, we don't believe, we don't trust in that idea.
But
and
then,
how I say,
but this is
It's
Julia.
very interesting because when you're in the audience, you often at any performance, whether it's a classical music concert or a avant-garde dance company, you have the sensation that, or the understanding that everything is hierarchically structured. But what you have just portrayed is this dialogue between conductor and the various people who are involved in it. When it breaks down, you have a problem. When the dialogue is good and there's an understanding or a cooperation between an understanding of what the framework is supposed to project, then you get the individuals collaborating with each other to meet the goal of the music. Is that correct? Am I interpreting?
Yes, that's correct. But I think it's more frequently, and it's because I work more frequently in new music. I'm a composer.
Yes.
I'm making new proposals. That means if you take an interpretation of Mozart, maybe the framework is more stable. People, they have some reference. They play Mozart for many years. And they have many ideas, and the conductor say, "How about bar number 55? You do a small conlay or whatever." and they know that because they played the entire life this music. When you come into orchestra with a new music, okay, you have the framework, you have the people's life, the way they believe music is, you have your belief, and it's really marked. It's really important that the score tells them something, but the score, it's not able to tell everything because it's new music.
Right.
There are things there in the score that was not prescribed before.
But now, Jonatas,
So
you have to work together. And that sort of bit that is not described then is moved forward on the basis of trust.
For sure.
Okay.
For sure.
But now you also said that in your experiment to do the string percussion inversion, that didn't work out because you were too far beyond people's expectations, right? So would this mean that also within a piece and within the way an orchestra might perform a piece, if there are events that are too far out of this proximal zone of expectation, the piece collapses? Does that happen?
Yes, but that's the big challenge of writing contemporary music. So and could collapse. I'm going to give an example. I don't know if it's for you. That's it. There's a Brazilian composer. I'm not going to mention because
Jonatas Manzolli.
No, okay. Let's say Jonatas Manzolli. No problem. And he went to a very important festival in Brazil, and he came with a score that was a ball, a crystal ball, like, and have notes there inside. And he asked people to make an interpretation of that ball. That it would be the score, okay? But before he start to perform the music, because the orchestra was not so keen about that, they make an agreement. We are going to play only B flat, because they are free to play what they see in the ball. And they came to the concert, and when that part where they have freedom, they play the same note. That's completely not what the composer wants. But they make this. Why they made it? Because they don't want to collaborate, because the freedom that the composer gave to them, giving a score like a ball, and they have to see there some notation and make their interpretation. They don't take it as for good, because they don't trust that kind of freedom that the composer gave to them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't know if it's a good example. You make me remind, because an example that I give to my students in class, because and came another point here is how the score. That's is very important. How the score is good for giving cues. I said it looks like I do everything. I don't care. I care very much. And how the score is good to give cues. For example, if some student come to me and say, "Hey, Professor, I want to make a graphic score. I want to make a little ball." I said, I always talk that. I say, first question I ask them, what you intend and which sound do you want to produce? So since you have this model, how the sounds has to sound like, now we have to find a better way to communicate it to the orchestra and to communicate to the musicians. And there's a second question that has to be asked. This piece is a solo piece. This piece is an orchestral piece, or this piece is a chamber music piece. It's very different. For example, if it's a soloist piece, you might invent something, and you have this incredible soloist that he plays violin here or in the back. It's a unique piece, and you can put everything there. So you have many freedom. If you go to chamber music, you have also freedom, but you have to deal with 4, 5, 6, 8 people. So the social relationship and the way they use to interpret the score take then a little bit more, let's say, freedom than, for example, when you go to orchestra. So, and when a student come to me and say, I'm going to write a piece for orchestral piece, or I'm going to write a chamber music, we discuss about, I would say, the tolerance of your writing. Let's explain it. How good is the symbols and the way you write to convey your ideas? If it's a chamber music, you can put extend techniques. You can explore many possibilities of the instrument. You can change the sound of the instruments. For example, if my piece for percussion and string instrument, and was what I did later, was for a string quartet and for a percussion, it didn't have a problem, because a small group of 4 musicians, and I go there even close to them, I tell them, play in this way, and he gonna listen and realize that. But when I propose this for the whole orchestra, it's different. So that means the way you write and communicate the score for different kind of ensemble, it's also very important. So, and the same idea, same musical idea, being performed by an orchestra, being performed by a chamber group, an ensemble, and being performed as a solo, it has a completely different representation in the score. So that means, as I told you, and even that, how do you drive it? How do you drive the response of the interpretation? So I think for soloists is very much in new music, talk to them. Really, talk to them. The composer has to talk to them. And also, there are times when I'm writing a new techniques that I call that person, how about it? And we dialogue. He said, no, it doesn't work. If you go to a chamber, so maybe you describe a little bit more people, you talk to them, but you don't have this really good relation.
But now, Jonatas, to follow up on this, right? So now, in some sense, you are in this more or less comfortable zone where you, as a human conductor or composer, are interacting with other humans. But actually, you are also one of the pioneers of interactive music systems, with which you started in the early 90s or maybe even earlier, which in some sense forces you to formalize a lot of these ideas about musical collaboration now into an algorithm that actually is executed by a computer, and maybe in interaction with other computers or other humans creates a piece of music, right? So how is that translation step then done from that perspective of collaboration?
Wow. Okay, thank you for that question. So when I start to work with algorithmic composition many years ago, before I start my PhD, my goal was to make a kind of automatic generative composition that, using computer, it's going to represent completely my musical ideas with an algorithm with mathematical laws. Okay, I start to work on that. Was the start of my PhD. My goal was to use a nonlinear system in this whole complexity. When I was doing the PhD in that moment, one question that came to me, and that's making me change, instead of working on algorithmic composition, I'm working interactive algorithmic composition. What's the difference? So when I start to work on that, and when I receive the response of the machine, of the parameters that I was imposed to the computer, sometimes I'll say, okay, I am happy. But I said, but I'm not completely happy. Why I'm not completely happy? Because I start to understand that music that the computer is performed is an instantiation of many other musical, many other ideas that it's conveying in my proposal. Let's be clear. When you work with a piece of art, you can paint, okay? But you have this concept, the general concept of that piece of art that you're going to make. So in algorithmic composition, from my perspective, when you finish and you give, and the computer generates that kind of music automatically, the machine is, let's say, is performed one small part of this whole concept that you parameterize it. That means the math serves you to represent the idea in terms of parameters, but the math doesn't give you the whole interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
Because to make the algorithm, you have to reduce the complexity of your idea.
Mm-hmm.
Because the numbers are not enough, and yours also is not enough to represent everything.
Yeah.
So, and I was very frustrated. I said, "Oh my God!" And I said, "I'm not going to finish this PhD because I'll go back to write music by hand." I said, and in that sense, I'm very, thankful to my supervisor at the time, Jim Fulkerson, that was a composer that has worked with John Cage for many years. So he came to me and said, the problem is that you don't want to have a automatic finished piece of music. You want to give space for interpretation. And the computer has to become part of the game. But the computer is not the guy that is going to perform exactly what you prescribe.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes the whole difference in my entire life. And we are talking here because of that. Mm-hmm. So when I realized that, I start to understand that sometimes you can use the maths and the algorithm to give boundaries of tolerance, where some behaviors are allowed and other behaviors are not allowed. But you're not describing the full behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you give space for interaction. So, and after that, I start to work with many kind of interaction. So, in my PhD, for example, long time ago, I developed a glove because I was conductor for many years. So I decided that the movement of my hands are going to give the variations inside that space of sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So that means the maths give me that space, and I move my hands inside the space. Of course, I don't have numbers. Mm-hmm. I have only sounds. And that's another point that I would like to say. After having the representation in the algorithm, the task is not to put numbers again. The task is to make the sound as close as possible to your interpretation. So that means you come back to the level of instrumentation, of performance.
Mm-hmm. But now, Jonatas, so this is now you move towards interactive music systems, but what are now you talk about interaction there, right? So what would distinguish interaction with an artificial music generating system and collaboration with that system?
I think artificial system, I would say a machine or synthetic machine developed system. I would say that this is one thing. Many. I do synthetic system to make music, okay. But the point is there where you put the interest of your design. So I have to come to Ada, to Roboser. So let's go to Roboser because it's the work we did together. So when we matched in the Roboser, I had this concept I describe it now in a let's say in a system that I called curvação in Portuguese. That means a curve that makes sound. That means I was looking for ways of drawing in this space of tolerance of possible instantiations of music, exploration of that space, creative exploration. When I saw Kepera, the small robot, walking in the arena, and we are there discussing about if the robot is attracted or not for the lights and so on, what came to my mind is this path of exploration in the arena might be equivalent to the path that a composer work in an interactive system might develop. So that means the small robot was not there to really to perform the music in that sense of performing notes. The robot is there to collaborate with a behavior, a dynamic behavior that will take out some chance and some principles that was available in the system.
Mm-hmm. But
so that means
it gives a variability, right? But
exactly.
But what I was wondering about, if you would now look at the next step of such a music system, and it has to be collaborative, what features would you have to add to Roboser to make Roboser collaborative and not interactive?
Yeah, I think the problem there at the Roboser was that Robos does not listen to the music it plays, and we have been work a lot about it. But what I mean by listen, that's a point. Okay, in music we talk about a lot of escuta, listen, and there are many layers of listening to things. Okay, listen to words, listen to music. But I think it's very special when you listen to music, because music is a very plastic material that penetrates our brain in many different layers. So that means if you define listen to music only in the acoustic level, it's one thing. And of course, listen to music can go for in the acoustic level, and maybe it goes in the social level, go in let's say in psychological level. So, but going back to Roboser, I think I would say that if you have built a feedback system that let the Roboser to listen the sounds that is performed in the environment, it will improve the system. I think, of course, next we tried to do that in Ada, but also Ada performed music, and we have many people interact with Ada, but Ada was not listening to herself.
Mm-hmm.
Ada was trying to understand the behavior of people inside the room. Mm-hmm. And also in the end, that means why Ada or the robots has to listen to the music they are performing, because they need to have a pleasure. Mm-hmm. Also, so if they have a pleasure to listen what they are performing, they would make change in the algorithm, because the algorithm, not in the algorithm, they would make change in the possibilities the machine is exploring in this space.
But then that would be your optimization objective. You're saying.
I would say that today is what I'm working, and okay. So because of it, I'm working too much with dancers. Mm-hmm. In this moment, because I think not because they listen music better than musicians. No, it's not because of that. I think because also in modern dance, it's not ballet like. So that means they have this possibility of adjusting the sound, adjusting their body, and I think it's a good paradigm to that relationship between mind and body, and is a good representation of embodiment or embodied cognition.
But now, Jonatas, if we now step outside of this domain of music, right? So it's very advanced. you have a very deep understanding of how to structure collaboration there and how to produce beauty with that if you want. But let's now generalize that just the domain of human collaboration in general. So let's say you want to manage a big organization, right? So what lessons would you extract from that domain of music to structure collaboration in a big business?
I think I would say that the rules are not for being perceived as a command. The rules are going to be perceived as possibility of interpretation. So you are not there to receive commands. You are there to make interpretation. So secondly, if you are in charge of the whole community, you are not there to write the rules. You are there to collaborate in the structure of the rules, in the prescription of the rules. And second, I would try to make people believe that all kind of work is a kind of creative process. Mm-hmm. No matter what you do, no matter. Right. It's a creative. You're doing a creation. So if somebody there in the chain of action doesn't feel good and doesn't feel creative in that work, I think something is wrong. So that means I don't know. I'm not running any company, of course. I don't know how it is going to be implemented, but this is my perspective, right. And also because I understand interpretation of giving meaning to something. It's an act of is a creative act. Mm-hmm. So that means if you don't give space to create creativity in the chain of the actors, I think maybe your work is going to be done some ways, but it's not going to be well done, in my opinion.
Right.
Because it's not only to make an execution of that, but it's make it good, make people feel good.
Right. So now we are again almost back in a confinement period because of COVID-19. So what did we learn about human collaboration in this period?
Well, I might tell you my experience because the first thing I think we have to learn from this period that collaboration is the base of survival. So that means let's take this problem of vaccine. Okay, I might believe that vaccine is not good for me for many reasons because I don't trust science or whatever. I don't say personally I think that. But if I don't believe that vaccination is about the collectiveness that I'm making good for everybody, so I didn't learn anything, you know. And this is one big, I think it is one consequence of that. People start to think too much about their own. They are isolated, but they forget about the whole. And we have now this problem. We are seeing how it's going to happen the next. Mm-hmm. Second thing that I learned to myself, I think I call this the statics of compression. What's the static of compression? When you have to express yourself in small space and with repetition of patterns, so many other things happen continuously. You put yourself inside that cave. So you have to take things from your values. If you don't have values, if you not think about your values, you have to build up them. Because if you don't do that, you're going to become crazy, and for sure. And what I did personally was at the beginning of pandemics, I was a little bit stressed and crazy. So I decided I'm going to write letters, musical letters. And I write many musical letters to friends of mine. Musical letters are a small score that take 5 minutes or 6 minutes to play them. But in doing that, I start to talk to people and people start to come back. And the largest experience of collaboration, I think I showed you, Paul, I wrote poetry, a small poetry describing that behavior of being reconnected. And I sent this to 15 dancers. And they bring me back with movement. There's no music. They bring me back with movement and ask them to read the poetry. Let's say, in that sense, there's no music. What I did is, when I received their movement and their voice, in that sense, I use algorithmic composition, but not to produce notes, to produce a kind of expression that mixed up their movement with their voice. And now I call this result as music.
Yeah, that's very beautiful.
There's no note. There's even one note there. But why I call this as music? Because it serves me as a composer to express a kind of will. But also, it's in the sound domain. It's organized. It's make a kind of melody. It's make a kind of harmony. But it's not necessary using pitch material.
Right.
And also, of course, there are rhythm. So I don't know if I answer your question.
Yeah, you did. But Jonatas, another question is, do you believe, as you say now, right? So in this COVID period, you saw people also withdrawing more onto themselves. And in that sense, also that's a risk for collaboration. But do you believe that humanity as such, let's say we look at massive challenges, right? Ecological collapse, look at Brazil, deforestation, the problems are massive. Do you believe that also, if you look at your own background and what you achieved, that humanity at large will be able to develop sustainable long-term collaboration? Are we really able to do it?
I think we need.
No, but that was not the question.
Yeah, let me say, a difficult question, but I tend to be that when people need things, they go for it. For example, if I'm starving, I go. So I believe that this new generation, the students of mine, my son, and they are going to make it for the good. We have to survive. I think that situation we are living now is a big alarm. And also, I think it's very important we take care of culture and art in that future society. Because many of the problems we have to solve are not only in the hands of science. And I'm talking about not only about environmental problems. I'm talking because environmental problems, they take many layers of, you say, the forest, other story but also we have this level of relationship. So you see how people tend to be very, very, let's say, intolerant today. I think one of the things that collaboration in arts and culture might lead us is to survive and build up a society of more homogeneity, not so with spikes. In many, we have a society all in spikes. And knives and forks, give me, I'm going to eat it. I'm going to eat. So that's the problem. But I think in the future, we have to give space for art, science, and culture if you want to succeed. Not only in science. Right. Of course, science has its role.
But Jonas, last question. If you could change one thing in humans, right? You can change one thing by magic, anything. What's the one thing you would change to make them better collaborators?
I would change their capacity of believing in other people. I would change their ability of being tolerant.
Jonatas Manzolli, thank you very much for this conversation. Hi, you listened to one of our podcasts in the series on collaboration, produced by the Instrument Forum and the Convergent Science Network. You can find more episodes on our website.